We do a lot of work at the Environmental Working Group on a wide range of issues. You may not have heard of Environmental Working Group, or maybe you have, but you've probably heard about some of the work we've done. We've mapped the routes to Yucca Mountain so you could type in your street address and find out how close you were. We've put the names of every farm subsidy recipient on the internet and the amount of money they receive. We've mapped some of the western public lands where mining and oil and gas exploration is taking place. And of all of that work, the one thing I want to talk to you about today is a very unusual research project that we conducted a few years ago involving 10 Americans, a very unusual group of people, because one day in 2004, we took one sample of blood from each one of them and tested it for 413 toxic chemicals. There's no group of people in the world who have ever had their blood tested for this many toxicants. And we found 287 across just these 10 people from one sample on one day. 287 toxic chemicals, about 200 per person. Now, among these were 28 different waste byproducts, dioxins, furans, all kinds of volatile organic compounds, things that come out of tailpipes, incinerators, consumer product ingredients, Teflon chemicals, Scotchgard, Stain Master, flame retardants, pesticides showing up in fruits and vegetables. And in some ways, most disturbing of all, we found 212 industrial chemicals and pesticides that were banned 30 years ago and still showed up in these people 30 years later when we tested their blood. Now, how were they exposed? How did they come to get an average, a total of 200 chemicals in each person? Well, it could have been air pollution, but it wasn't. It wasn't the air they breathed. We know that for a fact. There's 600 million pounds of pollutants emitted into the air in 2004, according to EPA, 650 different pollutants. We found some of those pollutants in their blood, but we know they weren't exposed by virtue of the air that they breathed. Might well have also been the water that they drank, but it wasn't. This is a study we conducted, building a big database. The National Tap Water Database, if you look it up on the web, is our product. EPA has not put together contaminant list across all water utilities in the country. We did as many as we could, over 1,000 contaminants there, but that wasn't the source. Could have been something in the food, but it wasn't anything that they bought at a restaurant or bought at a grocery store and came home and prepared and ate. That wasn't the source of their exposure either. They could have had over 1,000 chemicals, we found some of these, just from the migrating chemicals that come off of packaging that have been approved for use by FDA. Again, that wasn't the source. 168 ingredients are used on average in the personal care products that women use every day, according to our online survey. We also have a big database of personal care products. Men use have 85 ingredients in their 6 different personal care products, but I want to point out that almost all of the men used both toothpaste and deodorant. So we want to get a little credit for that. Hey, thank you. Yeah, that was really one of the big findings. They did not work in a place like this. They were not farm workers or farmers. That's not how they came by the pesticides that we found in their blood. So who were these 10 Americans? How were they exposed? Well, the truth of the matter is we don't really know very much about them. About the only thing we do know is that when the exposures took place, they looked something like this. This was the first study that had ever been conducted of a wide range of toxic chemicals in umbilical cord blood. We went to the American Red Cross, applied to their research program for 10 samples. The samples were collected at hospitals across the country of parents who volunteered to have their cord blood used for research purposes. Once we received that, we sent it to 3 or 4 laboratories in the United States and Canada and had this array of tests done. Here's another view. This is the new technology, of course, the new ability to look at babies in the womb. This particular baby at nearly full term, look at him smiling, isn't that amazing? This particular baby at full term, he was being exposed because he gets about 300 quarts of blood circulating to his body every day from the mom, right? And for many years, scientists and medical doctors thought that that blood was purified by the placenta and the impurities were kept out. Not the case. which is a problem because this particular baby, like all babies at that stage in life, also did not have a fully formed brain-blood membrane. And so he didn't have the barrier that they have at 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and older to toxic chemicals. So the brain tissue is literally bathed in the blood without any filtration system. The other thing about this baby is it's mine. This baby, this was about a week before he was born. He's here today. Will this count on my time if I cry? Babies like this in the womb are at their most vulnerable stage in life. Their organs are developing very rapidly, their brains, their hormone systems, their sexual development is being determined. Everything would tell you that you would want to protect them from toxic chemicals. And everything we know tells us that we don't. We don't do that. Now, of course, I'm all caught up in the joy of having this baby. My wife is here with him, and maybe you'll get to meet him later, unless he's fallen asleep during my talk. I hope you haven't. And the thing about it is now, you know, we've got sleepless nights, we've got crying in the middle of the night, we've got bottle feeding, we've got breastfeeding, we've got farting and pooping and tinkling and all those things. And then when he wakes up, he does it too. So it's really, my wife really has her hands full. But here's what we learned, the obvious thing. Industrial pollution begins in the womb. And these just weren't just any chemicals. When we matched them up against our toxicity databases, we found that 134 of them were associated with cancer in laboratory studies or in people. 151 associated with birth defects. 154 hormone disruption. And you're already noticing that this adds up to more than 213 because many of these chemicals have multiple toxic effects, right? 186 associated with infertility. 130 immune system disruptors, neurotoxins, 158 of those, you know, lead, mercury, PCBs, all kinds of organic chemicals that affect the nervous system. An incredible set of exposures, and that's what we found when we spent $10,000 per sample. What if we'd spent more? It's anyone's guess. And this hadn't been done before. It was a lot for us to raise that much money, but we don't really know where the number would go for the exposures of babies in the womb. Is it 100 more, 300 more? 1,000 more? What's the final number? No one has really any idea because no one has looked. And also no one has any idea what the effects of these exposures are because they haven't asked that question. And at this point, in some respects, it's too late. And so what we've decided to do at the Environmental Working Group, we started this process years ago with doing for the human toxome, our pollution burden, the pollution in people, we're trying to map that as best we can the way we've begun to map the human genome. Of course, we have slightly fewer resources to do it, but the point is, now that genetics, now that nature and nurture are coming together, we're understanding the genetic expression of physiological traits, diseases, and other even behaviors is related to a combination of what you bring to the party, your genetic endowment and predispositions, and what you might be exposed to. These two bodies of work need to be brought together. But the chemical companies are not so wild about it. It's kind of changed the debate because when we first started doing this biomonitoring, and now a lot of public interest groups around the country have picked up on our work, they've used our protocols, which we've of course freely offered to them so that they can test for a lot of chemicals in a small quantity of blood. Chemical companies are not so hot about that, so they want to talk about, well, the fact that it's just parts per billion, it's such low doses. We're really talking about modest exposures. They use the example of a part per billion, and they say it's the equivalent of one pancake in a stack of pancakes 4,000 miles high. That's what the chemical companies say. This is an actual picture of pancakes that we stacked 4,000 miles high for this. It was a very generous grant from the Tides Foundation. So let's talk about a part per billion. Are these doses really too low to matter? Is a part per billion really too low? It would seem to be. Stack 4,000 miles high, one pancake. Well, let's look at some things that might normalize this discussion a bit for most of us who aren't experts in chemistry. Let's compare the blue bars here with the green bars. The blue bars all come from blood tests we did of a good friend of ours named Jesse Johnson, runs a sustainable furniture company in New York City called the Q Collection. Healthy, beautiful furniture. You can eat his furniture. I've actually eaten some of the ottomans with a little mango salsa. It's great. Very safe. Badge 40H is the lining is a breakdown product from the inside of a tin can, a food can. It comes off. He had 97.5 parts per billion of badge 40H, right? It's in his blood. PFCs, these are the perfluorinated chemicals, the Teflon chemicals, Scotch Guard, Stainmaster, all those, long lived in the environment. Recent regulatory scrutiny, much lower levels though, 45 parts per billion. What could possibly have a biological effect? 45 pancakes in a stack 4,000 miles high, that's not much, right? Well, let's look at some things that weren't found in Jesse but will be more familiar to you. Like, for example, Cialis. One dose of Cialis puts a load in your body of 30 parts per billion. And of course, it can have profound therapeutic effects. 30 parts per billion. Another compound, Paxil, antidepressant. Again, one dose leaves in your blood 30 parts per billion and has the therapeutic effect at that level for most people. And some people it has side effects. I'll talk about that in a minute. Go down lower. Jesse had 21 parts per billion of lead in his body. We'd be concerned if you were a small child. Never good to have much lead in you, but there it is, 21 parts per billion, pretty low. We can go even lower. Mercury. He's very aware of mercury in fish, stays away from the fish that have high mercury levels. You can go to our website and lots of other websites, find out which one that is. He's fine, takes care of that. Very low level, right? What could possibly have a biological effect? How about the most common asthma inhalant ingredient in the country? This chemical, effective, one dose, 2.1 parts per billion, is in the desk drawer of every teacher and school nurse in the country, albuterol. Very low levels. Small doses matter. Let's go even lower. PBDEs, 0.29 parts per billion. These are flame retardants we found in Jesse's blood. What could possibly, not even a pancake, not even a third of a pancake, not enough to finish the syrup, but you can have a biological effect at much lower levels. NuvaRing is the most commonly prescribed birth control drug in this country. NuvaRing is effective, almost 100% effective, 0.035 parts per billion. Let's review about low doses. For 30 parts per billion, you can inspire human reproduction. For 0.35 parts per billion, you can prevent it. And for another 30 parts per billion, you can chill out either way. Now, low doses matter. Low doses matter. And even at low doses, some people are affected more than others. For example, go back to Cialis. You've all seen the ads. I think we're all adults here, but it doesn't matter if we're all adults because every 10-year-old in the country has either heard this said to him out of a TV or has read it somewhere in a magazine. At 30 parts per billion, if you have a sudden decrease in hearing or vision, you can't hear or see, stop taking Cialis and seek immediate medical help. That's called a side effect, right? Then there's the famous one, of course. If you experience an erection lasting more than 4 hours at 30 parts per billion, low dose, 30 parts per billion, call your doctor right away. How do those calls go? I'm sorry I didn't call you right away. I passed out. I had no blood left in my brain. My partner was on the phone to 911. I don't know, but low doses matter. Drugs are designed to have these effects at low doses. Chemicals are not tested to make sure they don't have those effects at low levels, and they end up in us. And if they experience chemical side effects, they can't call their doctor. So we need to prevent these exposures from happening so that we reduce the risks. We don't know that the risks in every case lead to disease. No one can say that because a chemical's in you it causes a disease, but we need to be on the watch. Because we're seeing major changes in diseases and illnesses that you can't explain by genetics alone. We don't mutate quickly enough to explain the increases in breast cancer and other illnesses. For example, hypospadias. This is a defect of the penis in little boys where the tip of the urethra does not come out at the end of the penis but someplace along the shaft and requires surgery to fix. It is now 1 out of every 125 baby boys. This birth defect has doubled and chemicals are implicated over that period. 62% increase in acute lymphocytic leukemia, also over a fairly short period of time. We don't evolve this quickly. We haven't suddenly evolved to develop these diseases. It's an interaction between our genetic predisposition and something, or some combination of things, we're exposed to. 40% increase in childhood brain cancer. This is not an artifact of our being better at detecting childhood brain cancer. If you were a pediatrician in 1972 or 1968, you didn't miss the diagnosis of brain cancer in a kid. If a kid's got brain cancer, you know it. This is real because the increase is real. Autism, we all know, is very controversial. Are chemicals involved? Which chemicals are involved? Is it thimerosal? Is it some metabolic pathway? No one really knows, but we do know that the incidence of autism is now 1 in 150 children, somewhere on the spectrum, and 60% of them are boys. And again, the question comes, if this was just an artifact of better diagnosis, and it's a more relevant argument in this case, I think, but if it were just that, then where are all the severely autistic adults now? Well, they're not there because they weren't developing autism at the rates we're developing it in the population now. Look at this one. This one really completely makes me mad. You know, at the Environmental Working Group, we like to say that we're driven by facts, not emotion, but facts like these really piss me off. Look at this. This is onset of breast development by race in girls in North America. The average age going down for white girls. Look at it for black girls. And look also that we have fewer data points, of course, because we don't study the black population as adequate, by any means as thoroughly, far from adequately. We have incredible rise in couples having trouble becoming pregnant, including women under the age of 25. 1 in 7 women developing breast cancer, 1 in 3 men, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 2 men develop cancer over their lifetime. Risk of cancer in the United States is greater than in any other country in the world. And when people living in Japan, for example, with a lower cancer rate migrate to the United States, their rates of prostate and breast cancer jump up accordingly to begin to match our population. It's not just the human costs, there's dollars at stake here. Lead poisoning, $43 billion a year from loss of brain function. Neurobehavioral disorders, a whole range of those, ADHD, autism, and so forth, $9.2 billion. These are all from the peer-reviewed literature. These are not our figures. IQ loss from mercury, all in the billions. So what can you do? Well, some exposures can't be avoided. We live in the real world. We live in the real world. You want to see that again, don't you? Yeah, oh yeah, you do. Oh, I knew it was that kind of crowd. Sure, yeah, it's not your kid. Why not? Let's see it again. Yeah. Yeah, not my son yet. We don't want to live in a nanny state. No one's proposing that. We don't want to suggest that people move and live under a rock and not eat or drink or go to work anymore. We live in the real world. But that doesn't mean we can't make some significant changes because we've made them before. Personal life, sure, buy organic, eat low mercury fish, filter your tap water, cast iron instead of nonstick, avoid fragrance and cosmetic ingredients. You can go to our website, lots of other websites, and find tips like this, but we can't shop our way out of this. We need the government. We need to make the government do something about this, right? We need to make them do something about this. And here's the problem. Chemicals show up in babies, and they show up on the front page of the newspaper every week because of this law that was passed in 1976 and never modernized since. It's the only major environmental law that's never been reauthorized, the Toxic Substances Control Act. Okay? 30 years ago, Jerry Ford signed it, may he rest in peace. Does not require health and safety studies before chemicals come on the market. 62,000 chemicals were grandfathered in. EPA has reviewed 200 of the 60,000 older chemicals. 80% of new chemicals are approved in 3 weeks. 5 chemicals total have been banned or severely restricted under the Toxic Substances Control Act. So weak, when we tried to ban asbestos using this law, we lost in court at the federal level. That's how bad this law is, right? Health and safety studies, when you bring a pesticide on the market, believe me, we've done a lot of work on pesticides. It's not a great system, but they have to do 120 health and safety studies. How many for toxic chemicals? 0 required mandatory studies on industrial chemicals that also end up in us. It's a rubber stamp process, and so you have situations like this. The chemical used to make Teflon pans, non-stick pans, ends up coming off those pans when they're overheated, killing pet birds, kind of a warning sign. Used to be very relevant in the coal industry, I think. Shows up in over 96% of the blood in the population. Shows up in polar bears. right? It's all over the world. They've contaminated the biosphere. They find it in 1982 at Parkersburg plant in 7 babies born to 7 women working on the line in Parkersburg. And 2 of those babies had exactly the birth defects predicted in animal studies. The only thing they have to do under the Toxic Substances Control Act is report this finding, and they didn't do it. They didn't even tell the government. The lesson, we need a modern law, and for the first time in a generation, we have reform on the horizon. We've got a big campaign underway now. We've got congressional investigations underway. We've got a new law proposed, the Kid Safe Chemical Act. It says, isn't this crazy? That a chemical has to be safe for children and others who are sensitive before it's allowed onto the market. Wild. Assumes chemicals are harming people until it's proven otherwise. Now the burden of proof is the other way. It prioritizes safety reviews and other regulatory actions on the basis of what's in people. This is this biomonitoring that we've been developing. And finally it says if a chemical's in cord blood, we're going to presume it's unsafe until you prove otherwise. I don't want those chemicals in my baby. And an unprecedented coalition is coming together. Scientists, medical leaders, a broad spectrum of religious authorities and leaders, and a wide array of environmental groups, and of course you. And we can clean this up. We can make this happen because we've done it before. We've cleaned up our blood. Lead in humans, we took lead out of gasoline, boom, that went down. Look what happened to blood lead levels. Likewise, we took PCB. Everyone said we couldn't have an electrical system if we didn't have this insulating material, the PCBs. We banned it after a while. Before we know it, as the ban takes effect, the levels go down in human blood. But we still found that chemical in the babies we tested in 2004, and we also found DDT. Could we have agriculture without DDT? They said not at the time. The ban was under discussion, but it was banned. We found substitutes. We've still got chemical problems in agriculture, but the levels of DDT in our blood have gone way down. This is my son watching his first thunderstorm roll in. We need a thunderstorm to roll into Washington and let them know that this baby and every other baby that comes into the world deserves to be born toxic-free. Thank you.